Hello and welcome to episode number 53 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chel, and as always, we've got a ton to talk about today. Before we dive into the biggest topics starting today's date, the social media plug, as per usual, is in order. Please follow the podcast on Twitter at Chel Squared and on Facebook at Chel Squared for more hot takes, news by featured guests, poll questions, and a whole lot more. If you want to follow my personal Twitter, it's at Chelney Andrew. Please rate the show. If you enjoy listening, it means more to me than I could put into words. And as an incentive, I will give you a shout out on social media and on the podcast if you leave a rating, review, or follow the show. Big thanks to Matt Nelson for subscribing to the podcast on YouTube, and to the unnamed person for giving the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Wish I knew who you were, but I appreciate you doing regardless. Every time you either like the show on SoundCloud, give it a rating on Apple Podcasts, follow it on Spotify, etc. It makes me feel great and helps the show out as well. Unless Chipotle, which I have given a lot of my money to, or the local sushi place, which I have also given a lot of my money to, wants to sponsor me because I've given them more of my money over the years, and I am willing to admit I don't make any money off the podcast. This is done out of love in my spare time, so when I see a new rating, review, a share, or whatever else, I get this big goofy smile that won't leave my face, so please do that if you haven't already. Also, Chel Squared is a part of National Podcast Network, a new network dedicated to NHL podcasts. Check the show out on there by going to nationalpodcast.network/Chel Squared. And though I am a SiriusXM employee, this podcast is not affiliated in any way with the company. The opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect the views of SiriusXM. If you're angry at my takes, direct them to me and me alone, please, and thank you. The NHL Draft is upon us. Recording this at around noon Eastern Time on Friday, June 21st. It is a super rainy and gray day here in New York, and it is a sunny day in Vancouver, according to my guest here, who I will introduce in a second. Start time for the draft is about 8 p.m. Eastern Time, but let's be real here. The Devils probably make a selection at 11:59 p.m., we all know how these drafts go. You gotta get in as much ad revenue as possible. My assumption is that when the time finally does come for New Jersey to make their selection, they'll go with Jack Hughes at number 1, which leaves Kaapo Kakko for the Rangers at number 2. And as a fan of the Rangers, that makes me very excited. But then the questions start to appear. Who does Chicago take at number 3? Will it be Trevor Zegras, who my guest projects will go at the 3rd pick? Maybe it's Alex Turcotte, who other people have going to Chicago. There's an abundance of chaos at the draft as per usual, but some people find peace in the mayhem. One such person is the guest appearing on Chel Squared today. He covers the draft for Sporting News and for the Analyst.com. Steve Kournianos. Steve, what's up? Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Appreciate you coming on. You have appeared on so many podcasts over the last few weeks. I don't know how you find the strength to do more, but especially when you're in Vancouver right now. You traveled from Nashville. I don't know how you do it, but I appreciate you doing it regardless. I just checked a second ago how you find peace in all this draft chaos, but in reality, how much joy do you have knowing that you spent an entire year tracking and analyzing all these players, and now today is finally the day where these players finally get drafted?
Yeah, it's exciting. You know, you when you watch these kids, really the top ones you've been watching for at least 2 years now, so it's kind of the culminating event is to see them get drafted. Also, the kids that don't get drafted, you have a pretty good idea about the ones that get invited to NHL development camps and rookie camps and what have you. It's exciting. It's also a big relief, too, because all the work that you did for 11 months gets funneled into, this little tiny weekend in June. And then after that, I guess the NHL free agency period takes precedence. So it's going to be good for me because it's, July is really the only month that I get to really take off. There's not a whole lot of prospect related stuff going on, but early August, you got the Ivan Holenka Memorial Cup that's going to be taking place, which is really the first notable draft event that's going to have all the elite kids for 2020 playing in one spot at the same time. So, but it is exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And this draft specifically is in a lot of intrigue, not just with who's going to go after 1 and 2, but how 1 and 2 are going to go. We have a pretty good idea that it's going to be Jack Hughes going first overall, but You never know. Things, these stranger things have happened in the past before, so we'll just have to, I guess, wait and see how it goes down tonight.
Well, if Capo Caco does go number one, then I guess the Rangers will settle for Jack Hughes at number two. I guess they'll settle for the consolation prize of Jack Hughes. Oh, what a shame! What a shame that'll be. And I'm sure you do this, but do you keep tabs on certain players as they transition in the NHL to see how your projections of their game kind of translated into reality?
Yeah, of course. Actually, I tried doing that this year with, I created this call to watch thing that I basically had to give up on in February because it was taking up too much of my time. Where I'm trying to for using a little mix of analytics and traditional stats and trying to track how all these kids are doing. Evaluating prospects is not a science; it's an art. So it's not like you could have a formula to figure out who the top 10 are going to be. And then those top 10 eventually become the 10 best players from their respective draft classes. It's never turned out that way. It's always different. So I do keep tabs, there's a lot of misses and a lot of hits, but for the most part, it's more like you feel a special when there's like an underrated kid that you were high on that no one else was really talking about. And you see him have a pretty great post-draft career in junior or in college and then move on to the NHL, become a star there. Yeah, it's a good feeling. But again, I spend so much time with the draft year kids that I can't afford the NHL post-draft kids too much time. So I got to find the balance, I guess.
So I don't want to ask you about your inner trade secrets here, but take me through a little bit, at least kind of the background on what goes into scouting these players. Obviously, you got to watch them, right, to see how good they are, and you got to do all that stuff. But besides just watching them, is there something in particular that you're looking for? How do you track these players, and how do you determine, if Turcotte in your final mock draft is going 3 or 5 or whatever other number? What kind of makes you decide, okay, this is going to be a top player, this is going to be a second round pick? Take me through that process.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Like usually, the way it starts out is all these kids are funneled into elite programs at younger levels, whether you want to call it midget or Bantam or, whatever, term they use nowadays. I think they've been changing the naming system for these leagues when these kids are young. So if you know enough hockey people, whether it be in North America or in Europe, you follow the right people, you read the right reports, you get a general idea of, okay, this kid's 14, but I'm going to have to keep an eye on him in a couple of years. You also have the World Under-17 Hockey Challenge, which is basically there's a bunch of Under-17 tournaments that involve pre-draft prospects or kids 1 or 2 years away from their draft year. And those tournaments, you get to see who dominates those tournaments and give you a clearer picture, I guess, on their respective draft class. And then, it starts out with the Holinka. Whatever. If a National Hockey Federation is willing to earmark 18 kids to represent their nation at a certain tournament, and it's a prestigious tournament, then you have to say, it's common sense, like, hey, those kids are probably going to be the cream of the class. Now, it's not always the case because it could be a kid who doesn't want to participate. He's contracted someplace else, so he can't make the tournament. He could be hurt. But that's basically the beginning of the process. And, so my top 31 list in the preseason will always change. It's always an evolving process. I don't get necessarily married to or anchored to a ranking because, I said he was 2 in April or whatever in August, so I got to say he's 2 at the end. No, if a kid, has some red flags during the season or he's not consistent. What I look for specifically, though, is hockey sense. That's what I love. I love hockey sense. I love that innate sixth sense that a lot of the elite players have that a lot of players in the lower rounds don't really possess. It's more like they rely just on their skill or their speed or whatever. But hockey sense to me, the ability to process plays 2, 3, 4 plays ahead of time, predict puck travel, puck direction, things like that. Poise under pressure is a big one. That's something that you learn eventually. If you're a defenseman, you learn eventually that if you make a slight little shoulder fake behind the net, you could maybe spin that forechecker to go in a different direction instead of just always relying on the same, thing. Because remember, the other team has a say too. They watch film and they watch how you play and they watch your tendencies, and so you have to kind of counteract that by keeping them off balance and doing your homework. So there's a lot, but again, it's not, the rankings are not supposed to be rigid. It's supposed to be a kind of flexible, where if I put a kid at ranked 14, that doesn't mean he's going to go 14th. It means that he's going to be somewhere. I think he's going to be the 14th best player in the NHL when all is said and done, out of his respective draft class. And he could be 18th, he could be 7th. It doesn't matter, but it's just more to give fans a general. And that's the key term, a general idea, because there's no such thing as a draft expert. There's no such thing as a draft scientist. It's even with analytics, you cannot predict the draft. It's just a lot of fun for fans to do that, and I try to facilitate that.
Well, you know more about the players entering the draft than I'd say 99.9999 repeating forever of the population, myself included. But besides the obvious two names here, that 1 and 2 of Jack Hughes and Kapokaka, who do you think will make their NHL team right out of the gate in October that perhaps maybe people aren't talking about enough? Or is it going to be the number 3 pick, whoever Chicago takes, that they are committed to putting on their roster day one? Or is there somebody, or more than one player, do you think, that has a more than likely chance of making it out of training camp?
Well, I think Bowen Byram, the defenseman, I have him ranked number 4, but in my mock draft, I have him going 3 to Chicago. I have him ranked number 3 in my rankings, and I have him going to Chicago at number 3. Byram, the reason why, he's ready from a skill standpoint. The reason why, if Chicago does take him, or LA, or any team that takes Byram has to be concerned with, is that this kid logs a ton of ice time. He logged a ton of ice time, almost 25, 30 minutes a game as a 16, 17-year-old. And then he did it again this year as a 17, 18-year-old. And his Vancouver team went deep into the WHL playoffs. He almost went to the Memorial Cup. It was an overtime goal in Game 7 that eliminated them in the finals. So you got to be concerned. I would be concerned that if he stays another year in Vancouver, he's got nothing to prove. He was the first defenseman in WHL history to lead the WHL playoffs in scoring. He's an all-star. He's the defenseman of the year, like you name it. And he's a stud. So what does he have left to prove in junior? You're going to put him on a Vancouver team, a Vancouver Giants team, so they could use him again 30, 35 minutes a game, burn him out, increase the risk of injury. No, I don't think he has anything left to prove there. The problem with that is that, the Canadian Hockey League is basically forced the NHL to create this rule where major junior players out of Canada can't play in the AHL until they're, 19 or 20. So they can't put him in the minors. So if they do, he'll have to play at the NHL level. But I think he's ready. I think he's ready to play. So it's an interesting decision to make. I don't have a problem necessarily, too big of a problem if the Blackhawks or the Kings or whichever team takes him decide to move him back to junior, let him, have a 9-game tryout in the NHL, play for Canada at the World Juniors, what have you. But to me, out of all those prospects, Byram is one. You look at the other kids, Zegras, Turcotte, Cousins, Boldy, all the forwards, Kirby Doc. They can't do the 9-game tryout with the college kids. All the NTDP kids are college recruits. So they'll lose their NCAA eligibility if they decide to play. So in the AHL or in the NHL. So that's another tough decision that involves the families of those kids as well. Is the goal to go to college at least for a year or two, work on your degree? You don't know. Every family's different. The kids that I think could crack are the European kids, specifically the defenseman Moritz Seider from Germany. Philip Broberg is a guy that I'm not too bullish on like other people, but I could see NHL teams be bullish on him and also make him a top 10 pick and have him in their lineup on opening night, because he's got both Seider and Broberg have NHL builds for defensemen. They can skate, they have size, they can hit. They're not opposed to playing physical, and they can contribute offensively. So to me, those two stand out. Vasily Podkolzin, the Russian, is definitely ready to play in the NHL, but I think he feels like he might not be ready for another year or two. So he might stay in Russia. That could impact his draft status. So you're going to have Hughes and Kako guaranteed at the top. I think Byram, Seider, the 3 defensemen, Byram, Seider, and Broberg would be able to contribute at the NHL level immediately. But it's, like I said, it's up to the teams for them to decide.
Talk to me about Spencer Knight, the goaltender that you have number 16 in your ranking, there's, at least on social media, there's a sense that he's either going to be really good or there's going to be some cracks. And this is not something that I claim to have a whole lot of knowledge on, because I watch the NHL. I work a full-time job and I watch the NBA and the NHL. I don't have enough time to watch these younger kids, and which is why I asked you to come on, because this is what you do. You say there's no such thing as a draft expert, but I feel like if there's anybody close enough, then you are definitely one of the people close enough to being a draft expert. Talk to me about Spencer Knight, because there seems to be more polarization with him, at least from what I've seen, than other players. Is it because he's a goaltender and goaltenders take longer to develop into good goaltenders in the National Hockey League, or what seems to be the reason behind Spencer Knight kind of being a polarizing figure in the first round of the draft?
Well, the thing about polarizing, it's polarizing with Knight. It's in a good way, not a bad way. I think because of his skill. If you just forget about draft history, you forget about draft trends, you forget about the fact that a first round goalie hasn't won a Stanley Cup, I think, since Marc-Andre Fleury in 2009, or at least a first round top 10 pick, who was a goalie. It's from a skill standpoint, he is technically superior to any goalie prospect since Carey Price. I mean, that is without a doubt. If you look at their draft years, yes, obviously there have been goalies picked outside the first round since Carey Price, whether it be Jonathan Quick or whether it be, Jordan Binnington. Look at what he just did. Matt Murray, all the cup-winning goalies, Braden Holtby, Vasilevsky, who was a late first-round pick, not necessarily a top 10 pick. These guys in their draft year, if you just look at what they did as amateurs, 17, 18 years old, none of them can hold the candle to Spencer Knight. He's that good. He's just a dominant figure on the ice. He could handle the puck as well as, I don't know how old you are, but I go all the way back to Ron Hextall in the late 80s when he was a goalie for the Flyers, and he was a notorious puck handler. I mean, this is a guy that was scoring goals. He was, head manning the puck, incredibly strong wrists, and Knight is that good. Marty Brodeur is another one. So when you look at all that and you evaluate it against his peers, then you say, okay, well, here's the clear-cut best goalie that we have available for the draft. At the same time, though, if you're an NHL GM or you're a scouting director, you got to say, well, yeah, but look at all these goalies who are winning Vezinas or being nominated for Vezinas and leading their teams to the Stanley Cup. Henrik Lundqvist, 7th-round pick. Pekka Rinne, 7th-round pick. Jonathan Quick, a later-round pick. Braden Holtby, a later-round pick. You just go down the list. I mean, there's only in the last, there's only been 2 goalies in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years that have gone in the first round. Jake Ottinger, one of them, and Samsonov, the kid that went to the Capitals back in 2015. Carter Hart, who's going to be the Flyers starting goalie this year, he was a 2nd-round pick. So I think teams understand the need for goaltending. They're just not sure that spending a first-round pick is the right course of action when history tells us that if you want elite forwards, if you want an elite center, or you want an elite winger, I mean, it's like a 90% chance that you're going to find him in that first round and high in that first round. Once you go outside the first round when it comes to forwards, the numbers get thinner and thinner in terms of, NHL production and stardom and which guys are top line players on their teams. With defensemen, it shifts a little bit more towards the later rounds. You have a lot of home runs in late. John Klingberg, Roman Josi, Shea Weber, PK Subban, Duncan Keith, Zdeno Chara. These are all either current NHL All-Stars or future Hall of Famers who were not first-round picks. But if you look at the Hart Trophy winners, the Art Ross winners, with Nikita Kucherov being an exception, Jamie Benn another one, but it's always the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys. So with goalies, I think when you use the term polarizing, I guess it's correct for this specific year because the trend has been not to draft goalies high. Carey Price was a 5th overall pick. Marc-Andre Fleury was a 1st overall pick. Rick DiPietro was a 1st overall pick. You go down the list in the 80s and 90s, there were always goalies that went pretty high. Not all of them lived up to the potential. But again, look at the state of goaltending in the NHL right now. Look how terrible good teams with scoring and defense, but they can't win games because their goaltending let them down. Florida Panthers being the great example when you have talent up and down a roster, but your goaltenders can't stop a beach ball. So I think that's why I have Knight. I think I have him mocked going to Florida, because if you can't have a goaltender to build around, then it's going to be tougher to do. But like I said, there's another side to that argument that says, hey, man, look at the Penguins. I could go out and I could have Crosbys and Malkins and Kessels and Letangs. And, look at that. I'll have a third-round pick or a fourth-round pick like Matt Murray in goal, and we're going to win 2 cups in a row. So it's interesting to see how it trends. But I think that the goalie gurus, each team has a goalie guru. I think the goalie gurus are going to get into the ear of their GMs and say, no, you have to watch this kid. And they'll sit down and they'll even break it all down in film sessions for them, and show them that this kid, Spencer Knight, is an elite talent. He deserves to be a top 10 pick. We'll just have to see how it goes down.
I would also have to assume that if you draft a goaltender there high, especially in the first round, there's more pressure on the goalie, because there's 12 forwards on a team. There's 4 lines. There's only 2 goaltenders per team. 3 maybe if you're Columbus, I guess. But for the most part, you have your starting goalie, you have your backup goalie. So if you draft a goalie high, there's seemingly a lot more pressure on both the team and also the goaltender to live up to those expectations. Because if you draft a forward high, and let's say they don't necessarily meet their ceiling, but they're still relatively good at the NHL level, well, then they could play on the second line or the third line. If a goaltender isn't starting goaltender caliber at the first, if you draft them in the first round and they're not elite or starting goaltender potential, they're considered a bust, right? That would be my assumption, is that if you draft a goaltender in the first round, or at least high somewhere in the first round, or maybe early second round or something like that, and they don't end up being the starting goaltender that you were looking for or need on your team, then that pick would more than likely be considered a bust. But on the other end, if you draft a forward or a defenseman and they end up being a top 4 or a top 6 player instead of the top 2 that you were looking for, well, then they're still serviceable players. So I feel like there's a little bit of a bias against goaltenders, because there's a fraction of the jobs available between the pipes in the NHL than there would be as a skater.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right. I mean, with goalies, you could there's only so many contracts available. There's only so many roster spots available. At the NHL, you got 1 backup and a starter. AHL, you got 1 backup and a starter. And then you have the ECHL, which for forwards or defensemen might be the kiss of death in their careers. But for goalies, it could serve as a pretty good proving ground, because goaltending is a science. Goaltending is definitely a science. If you talk to enough people, it's not really an art. You have to be technically aware, superior. Yes, it helps having net awareness and understanding your angles and the positioning of your hands. Obviously, if you got a quick blocker hand or quick glove hand, you could position it differently than the way the traditional methods indicate. But again, the thing is with goalies is that they take so long to evaluate and really put a stamp on. Look at Jack Campbell. Jack Campbell was, I think, the last goalie picked in the top 15. I think he won 11th overall back in 2010 or 2009. I'm forgetting. But Jack Campbell was Dallas drafted him. I mean, he was a bust. He was gone. He was off the radar. He was toiling in whatever leagues, bouncing around from the AHL to whatever. Maybe he played. And then he got a chance with the Kings. The Kings obviously still were bad this year. They were rebuilding, and they gave him a shot. And he played pretty well. So, what is he now? 27, 28 years old. Cam Talbot is another one. Castoff, free agent signee out of college. He was a nobody. And then he ends up coming to the NHL. Henrik Lundqvist gets hurt. He gets his opportunity. He plays outstanding for the Rangers. And he parlays that into a trade to Edmonton and had a near Vezina caliber season before, obviously now he's on the downturn. But it goes back to what you said, how there is pressure, but with the pressure, if you have an extra pick in the first round, then you could say, hey, we gave it a shot. But to make a goalie the centerpiece of your draft is a very difficult thing to do, and it takes a lot of guts, a lot of moxie, a lot of war gaming and an analysis for you to make that call. But I think the the reason why I look at Florida is like they have nothing left to do. They have the elite forwards. They have the elite prospects. They have committed ownership. They really have nothing left to do. You know what I mean? So if they go out and they swing for a home run with, let's say, Spencer Knight, and they pass on some future All-Stars, well, look at the guys they have in their pipeline. You know, Henrik Borgstrom and Owen Tippett and Grigory Denisenko. These are elite caliber prospects. So it's not like you're relying on that one pick this year to be the saving grace for your franchise, at least from a skater standpoint. But the goalie, and like I said, if you take a shot at it and see what happens, if not, it's not that big of a deal. But I'm sold on Knight. I think if I was an NHL GM and I did my homework, I would say, you know what, he deserves it. He's going to be a franchise number one goalie in the NHL, and the chances of him busting are very slim because he's not. He's like a Peyton Manning, man. He's a student of the game. He spends an incredible amount of time studying himself and watching film. And, there's always that story about Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf when they were being interviewed in their respective draft years. It was going back to 1997, I think. And they asked Ryan Leaf, what are you going to do after you get drafted? What are you going to do with the money? And he said, I'm going to have a big party. All my family and friends are going to come over. I'm going to go maybe take a vacation and go do this thing. And then they asked Peyton Manning, well, what are you going to do after you get drafted? He said, I'm going to look at the schedule and I'm going to watch film for every team that we play in the schedule next year. You know what I'm saying? So now I'm not saying that's the reason why one became a star and the other one became a bust, but it just shows you how if you're a student of the game, if you watch film and you're able to assess yourself objectively and fix your deficiencies or at least try to fix them, then you'll be fine. I think Knight's that kind of player.
And in terms of players that maybe people don't have high on their mock draft, but what are some names that you have in the back of your head, or names that really pop out at you that really suggest, hey, like this is a player that maybe teams should get a better look at because there's something about this player in particular or these players in particular that screams to me NHL player or NHL star. And with Florida, with Spencer Knight, I think that would be a great pick for them because with the reports about Luongo potentially either going on LTIR or potentially even retiring, they don't have a goalie. Like their goaltending prospects right now, they got James Reimer, and end of list. Like they don't have a starting caliber goaltender right now. And for Spencer Knight, I mean, would he just come to the NHL right away? Because Florida's that desperate. Florida doesn't have a goaltender. So if Luongo doesn't start the season, would Spencer Knight right away go to college? I mean, he's in the national team development program. So if he goes to the NHL, he can't go back to college. But so what would Florida do with say Florida drafts Spencer Knight and Luongo doesn't start the season? Will we see Spencer Knight in a Florida Panthers jersey come October?
I doubt it, only because it's just goaltending. They're still kids, and like I said, even though it is a science, it's still there's a human element. You got to worry about a kid's psyche. The last thing you want now, I think Knight's the kind of kid that if he gets absolutely obliterated at the NHL level, that he'll go back and work on to fix it. And you remember, you're not drafting a kid for the now. You're drafting a kid for 5-6 years down the road. That's like where they're going to be at their peak or their prime. That's the area you want to focus on. Yeah, it's all perfect if we could all be Patrick Waugh and he could step in as a teenager and win the Canadiens a Stanley Cup like he did in 1986. But it's just not the case anymore. I think Carter Hart being drafted in 2016. So he played another full season in Everett and then, had a little bit of a cup of coffee. And now, last year he was ready to go. I think 2 years is a pretty good buffer zone. Let the kid mature a little bit physically. Florida's got issues in goal, you're right. But that's something that they need to address on the trade market or the free agent market. And what you're doing is by drafting Spencer Knight, you're sending a message not only to the fans and not only to the organization, but also to the rest of the league. Like, hey, we know we got skill. Now we're going to have goaltending. So you could beat up on us now, but in a couple of years, you're going to be regretting it, and you should have never passed on this kid. So I think it's the days that we see a teenage goalie in the NHL are gone. It would be a very risky proposition for Florida to put him if Florida does take him, or any team for that matter, if they take Knight. to make him a starter in the NHL. Right, we're coming right out of a draft year. I mean, I don't think it's kind of dicey.
Well, Florida, if they sign Bobrovsky, right, all problems are resolved. But if they don't sign Bobrovsky, well, then they're in some huge trouble. And also,
Yeah.
with Barkov making a joke slash jab at the awards a couple of days ago. Hey, we have more fans from Finland here than fans in Florida. I mean, it was funny. It was also kind of like, you mind repeating that, Alex? Like, can we?
Yeah.
It was a joke. It was also something that maybe he shouldn't have said. So it is. I don't know if that's a red flag per se, but it is not something that is a good look for the Panthers. And if they don't sign Bobrovsky or Varlamov or any of these, good goalies on the market right now, they might be in big trouble.
Yeah, I think. I mean, listen. The thing about the Florida sports market, you see it with the Marlins, you see it with the Rays, with the Buccaneers. It's just
the Montreal Rays as an
yeah. I
as
saw
an
that. I saw
aside.
that. I don't get that. I'm happy for Montreal, but I don't get that. I mean,
Yeah, it's
but
weird.
The college game is so big down there. Plus the fact that you have all the transplants, it's very tough to establish. But look at Tampa Bay. I mean, Tampa Bay had the same issues when they weren't winning. Didn't have full arena. They had issues drawing fans and what have you. And they became a cup champion and they established an identity. The mistake that the Panthers made was back in '96 when they went to the cup. They were never able to build off that. Now I'm not going to blame the ownership groups. I'm not going to blame the fans. But the fact of the matter is that you can't blame the fans when you've only made the playoffs like 4 times in your franchise's 25 plus year, whatever it is, history. You can't blame the fans. You got to build a winner. You got to build it. The every team that stunk, right? That's good now. At some point they used to stink, and when they stunk, no one was at the arena. The New England Patriots used to stink. When you went to Foxborough back in the early '90s, no one was at Foxborough. The Red Sox used to stink. When you go to Fenway back in the, let's say, early '90s or '92, '93, guess what? You could get a ticket, no problem, and you could move around the stadium anytime you wanted to. So, I understand what Barkov did. He's trying to get the fans to go to the games, but at the same time, you got to win. You got to stop the puck. You got to score goals when they matter. So Florida had a great year. The year before that, they generated a lot of excitement. Remember 2 years ago, they almost made the playoffs, and there was excitement surrounding South Florida hockey and blah, blah, blah. And then what do? They followed that up with a terrible season. The goaltending stinks. They're getting blown out of games. They're exciting to watch with the skaters, but the goaltenders can't stop anything. So fans aren't stupid. They know that, hey, why should I pay my good hard-earned money to go watch a junk team, a team that can't win, a team that can't make the playoffs? It's not necessarily a great hockey environment in South Florida where, it's basically an arena in the middle of a bunch of strip malls and shopping centers and things like that. So it's going to be tough for them to do. They need to find a goalie to win games for them. That's it, plain and simple. Make the playoffs, become relevant again, and then we can start talking about how the fans don't go to your games. I mean, that's my opinion.
But you're right. It's an opinion, but it's also at least it's my opinion that your opinion is the right opinion to have.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I mean, if your team doesn't win games, unless of course you're the New York Knicks, which I'm unfortunately a fan of, this team has been terrible for my entire existence, except for 1 year, and they've been just trash for every other year, and yet the MSG is sold out almost every game. Which kind of feeds into the mediocrity, I guess, because if we're still going to the games, then they have no pressure. Jimmy Dolan doesn't have any pressure to make a better product, I guess. That's the mentality of the Knicks. I don't know. But they did draft RJ Barrett. They didn't go off the board. They did the right thing for once. So that's good. I'm happy the Knicks didn't go completely off the board and draft someone we've never heard of, which has been their quota for the past few years, drafting someone that we can't pronounce their name of, which they did in the second round. But they had to meet their quota somehow. But what are some of the names here in this draft that you think are going to be stars potentially down the road that aren't Jack Hughes and Kaapo Kakko? Who are some of the players that you think are going to make a big impact in this league? Maybe not next year, maybe not even 2 years down the road, but eventually, when they get into the spotlight, they will prosper.
There are several. This is a really deep draft for center iceman. So I think the fact that the league is trending towards allowing these kids to take a little bit longer to develop, but at the same time, they're willing to give them a chance to play at the NHL level and give them a significant role 1-2 years after the draft, and not necessarily just the top 2 or 3 picks. I mean, you're looking at kids in the middle of the first round from previous years making the league within a year or two. So in this specific draft, I mean, you got to start with Trevor Zegras. I know we already talked about the defenseman in Byram, but Trevor Zegras is my third-ranked prospect, phenomenal playmaker, outstanding vision. He's performed without Jack Hughes. He's performed with Jack Hughes. He played on his wing, even though he's a natural center. So I think when you look at his dynamism, how electrifying he is with the puck, his vision, his ability to make plays on his backhand better than most players can make on their forehand. I mean, it's crazy, the kind of touch that he has and his ability to control the puck. So he's going to be a number 1 center in the NHL. It's just a matter of time. I really like Matt Boldy. I like Matt Boldy a lot. He's a 200-foot winger. He's incredibly smart. He's defensively responsible, but you saw what happened at the Under-18 World Championships where he was able to showcase his offensive skills. You know, this is a guy kid that didn't play on Jack Hughes' wing. He was still put up a lot of points, but he was a second line winger, didn't see the primary power play time with the primary power play unit. So obviously when you play in the power play with an elite playmaker like Jack Hughes or Trevor Zegras, it's going to beef up your stats. But he was still able to produce a 30-goal, 80-point season, basically playing second-line minutes. But I think you're looking at a future Selke Trophy winner, or at least candidate. He's a Mark Stone, Marian Hossa type of a player. And listen, Cole Caulfield, he's only 5'7", but this kid can bury the puck. And it's not just he scores goals one way like Ovechkin, either a wrist shot or the one time. He scores goals in a bunch of ways. Near the goal, the side of the goal, behind the goal, doesn't matter. He's going to put the puck in the net. So I think you're looking at a potential perennial 35 to 40 goal scorer. And another kid that I like a lot, that he's in the middle of rounds right now, but if you watch his dynamism, I know I use that term a lot, but he's an excitable prospect on defense, and that's the Finnish kid, Ville Heinola. He's a 5'11", $175. He's not like a big imposing guy. But if you watch him play in the Finnish Elite League this year, playing for Lukko, and he's playing top 4 minutes, he's being used in all the situations, but it's his speed and agility and his hands as a way to power play, to quarterback a power play, I think are outstanding. I think he's going to be a big-time point producer in the NHL.
I don't think I've ever seen this before, but in your NHL draft big board that you put out on sportingnews.com, 5 of your top 8 players are U.S. national team development players. Have you ever seen that before? Have you ever seen this big of top tier talent coming from U.S. development teams? Because this seems like it's been years in the making, and now finally we reached a point where the U.S. has become one of the biggest developers in hockey talent.
Yeah, I've never seen it before. I mean, you're looking at the most any one team, the most prospects any one team produced in the top 10 of an NHL draft. You have to go all the way back to, I think, the 70s. It was some junior team in Canada. So now you're going to have the first program in NHL draft history to have not only 4 top 10 picks, but they're likely going to have 5, maybe even 6 top 10 picks if someone's willing to roll the dice with Spencer Knight. And then you got Cam York, the defenseman, too. So right there, you're looking at, what are you looking at, 6, 7 kids in the top 15 of the draft, possibly? It's unheard of. It's almost like what Alabama does in the NFL draft, or what Kentucky or Duke do every so often in the NBA draft, where you're going to have 3 or 4 or 5 picks in that first half of the first round. So the thing is, though, yes, it's a banner year for USA hockey. It's a banner year for US high school hockey. It's a banner year for the NTDP, but also a banner year for the USHL, because they're going to have a lot of picks picked in the first and second round as well. It's a down year for the Canadian Hockey League, but everything goes in cycles. So next year, it's not going to be the case. Next year is very strong contingent from the Ontario Hockey League, from the Western Hockey League, and from the Quebec League, who's probably going to have the first overall pick in Alexis Lafreniere, and then the NTDP next year, maybe like one kid, the defenseman Sanderson. That's about it. You're looking at only maybe one first-round pick for the next year's NTDP. So, like I said, but it's still a historic. Are we ever going to see one junior program provide an NHL draft with 5 or 6 or 7 top 15 picks? I say the answer is no. It's going to be quite some time before we even come close to that again.
I feel like people aren't talking about this enough. Like this is so huge for U.S. hockey. Because you take a look at even 5-10 years ago, if someone said to you, "Oh yeah, in a few years from now, 6-7 players of 6-7 top players in the draft are all going to be U.S. bred talent," people are going to look at you like you're crazy, because this is supposedly Canada's game, and Canada is all great about developing and all that. And now we've reached a point where, as you said, it comes in cycles, of course, but this is incredible, and yet I haven't seen enough coverage, or maybe I'm missing out on it, but this, and I'm sure it's going to be talked about a lot in the NBCSN and the TSN coverage tonight later on. But there's, to me at least, maybe I'm just missing it, but there seems to be just not enough in terms of just coverage on how amazing this turnaround has been.
Yeah, I think a big reason, I'm not trying to play any type of nationalistic or bias angle or anything like that, but the truth is that the majority of the people that you see on TV and analyzing the draft, they're Canadian based. So Hockey Canada has a relationship with TSN. The Canadian Hockey League has a relationship with Sportsnet. TSN and Sportsnet provide the NHL Network, and in some cases NBC Sports Network, with their draft guys and their talking heads, so to speak. And so they've all acknowledged how powerful an NTDP this is. So it's not like but you're never going to get, it's not like, you have a whole bunch of Americans who are familiar with USA Hockey sitting in a booth at the NHL Draft talking about how impressive a group this is.
Which there should be, right? There should be.
When it's historic like this, yes. I mean, 5 possible top 10 picks from one program, never been done before. Yeah, it should be. And it's kind of like being mentioned. What I get a lot from, and I have a lot of followers and friends on the other side of the border, and they're asking me, "Is this real? Like, is this just hype? Like, is this?" I'm like, "No, man, this is real. Like, if you watched." And the thing is, I got to give Pete Krupski credit. Pete Krupski is the play-by-play guy for the NTDP, based out of Plymouth, Michigan. And he told me, I've been going to Plymouth for years, and I was there in 2017, 2018, at the end of 2018, to see a playoff game between this U17 group, which is now the 18 group, play against Chicago in the USHL playoffs. And I was really there to see like some 2018 prospects on Chicago's side, namely Blake McLaughlin, who's a 3rd-round pick of Anaheim. But here I am. I'm watching Trevor Zegras, and I'm watching Matt Boldy, and I'm watching Drew Hellison, and because I think all the big names went with Team USA to the under-18 World Champions. So Hughes wasn't there, Turcotte wasn't there, Caulfield wasn't there, Knight wasn't there, but still, I'm watching basically the rest of the team. And Pete Krupski said, "I'm telling you, I know you have to focus on the 18s because it's their draft year, but you got to watch out for the 17s next year when they become the 18s. They are phenomenal. They've been destroying everybody in the USHL, which rarely happens for the 17-year-old team. Because, of course, the 17-year-old team and the 18-year-old team, they play the same USHL schedule, even though one team has older kids than the other, but still. And he was right, man, 100% right, because, and I've said this on record, and I'll say it again, I've been following hockey for 40-something years, and I have never seen a team consistently dominate and humiliate, well, not humiliate, but humble an opponent as frequently and as consistently and as impressively as this NTDP. The only 2 teams that I think compare are the old Red Army teams of the the KLM line, and Makarov and Krutov and Fetisov back in the 70s and 80s. And the 1980s Dynasty Oilers with Gretzky, Messier, and Coffey and them. That's it. I mean, the way that these kids execute plays. And hockey, I think people think hockey is like, oh, just get the fucking skate. Like, no. There are systems. There are plays that have to be practiced and executed. And these kids execute plays like I've never seen teenagers do before, and for that matter, any team do before. There's no desire to show each other up or be overly fancy with the puck for the sake of being fancy. They're a precision machine. They slice through all types of defenses. They can't stop them. And yeah, listen, they lost to Russia at the U18s. It's a single game. It was an upset. It happens. They lost in a shootout. They still won the bronze, and but overall, and the draft is going to validate that, or their NHL careers down the road are going to validate the fact that this might have been the single greatest junior program in the history of hockey. I mean, let that marinate. The greatest collection of junior hockey players on one team in the history of hockey. I mean, that's pretty outstanding stuff. And they're all American-born kids.
Wow. If they don't get enough praise as it is, that was that. I mean, I'm sold now. If I wasn't sold before, I'm definitely sold now. I know you got to go in a few minutes, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I'm going to let you go here. In terms of trading up or trading down, we still don't know what the cap is for next season, which is not great. I feel like it's going to be a little bit lower than some teams wanted, especially teams like Toronto and San Jose and teams like that who don't have, and Vegas, who don't have a whole lot of cap room or maneuverability at all. And it seems to be on social media that the reports are that the cap is going to be somewhere between $81.5 and $82 million, which is lower than what it was thought to be earlier on in the season, which was around 83. So this is going to be a little bit of a problem. Now, with that in mind, how many big trades do you think are going to happen with some of these picks tonight or tomorrow, whether it be moving up to the top 10 or moving down and kind of getting getting more assets packaged in together? And do you think that teams are motivated? Because at JD_Media Monster says he doesn't think teams are super motivated at the moment to really make huge moves right now at the draft. So in terms of what teams are looking for, how many of these big trades, and I'm not saying, trade the sixth round pick for this year for a sixth round pick next year. Let's forget these trades exist for a second here. But I mean, in terms of the bigger trades that may or may not happen today, how many, if at all, of these trades do you think are going to happen?
I mean, I'm just speculating, but I mean, the last time we saw, a team trade out of the top 10 was Arizona back in 2017. They traded the 7th overall pick for Derek Stepan and Antti Ranta. The Rangers ended up taking Lias Andersson with that pick. The thing about that draft, though, is that it was assessed as a very top-heavy draft and pretty weak overall collectively. So I know that some might say, well, if they trade out, then why they trade 7 when they have such a high pick? If it was a deep draft, they could just get similar players later on. But I think that Arizona's department at that time might have said, you know what? Like, Derek Stepan means more to us right now than that 7th pick will be to us down the road. We already have good prospects, so let's make the deal. I don't see teams in the top 10 outside of Colorado because they have, like I said, they have 2. They got 4, and then they got 16. I don't see teams, and maybe Philly too, because Philly has so many prospects already, and they have the 11th pick, and they need to be good now. They might be willing to trade that pick to make themselves better for the now. I can't see any of the major teams in that top grouping trade out of that because of the quality of these. When do you have a draft where you have so many elite centers? You're looking at 6 to 7 centers with franchise potential, top line, all-star potential. Why would you trade out of that? I mean, you're not going to win a cup without a good center. So why would you, even if you have one already at the NHL level, why don't you use the Patriots model and just sustain your dominance? So if you have a star center in the NHL level right now, then sustain it for the 10 years when they're gone. So I don't see a whole lot. But at the same time, you got a couple teams with multiple picks, Anaheim being one of them. The cost to move up into the top part of the first round, I think is going to be, let's say use Vancouver or Philly as an example. Let's use Philly at 11. The price to get that pick from them is probably going to take another year's first rounder, maybe protected. It would take a second round pick and maybe a key prospect, or it could be an established NHL player, a guy like, let's say, a Chris Kreider. And I'm not saying that the Rangers are going to make trades with Philly because that probably won't happen, especially on draft day. But I think if Chris Kreider is one guy that is moved, I know that his name is kind of being floated out there, that it is going to cost the team a first-round pick or at least something close to it. But we always talk about trading up and trading down, whatever. I don't see that upper half. I don't see that top group of teams passing on the chance to take a franchise center or a franchise defenseman in Byram's case, or a franchise winger in Boldy or Caulfield or Kako's case. So, we like to talk about it. It's fun, to get the Flames a little bit higher. But again, like you say, you never know. Things can happen.
Well, we saw it in a couple of days ago where the Winnipeg Jets the deal pretty much ended up being 25 games of Kevin Hayes and Neil Pionk, who is a black hole in defense, for Brendan Lemieux and Jacob Trouba, which, if you're the Rangers, is a home run, slam dunk, whatever you want to call it. I mean, that was a steal, to put it lightly. I don't know what Kevin Cheveldayoff was doing. Maybe, the reports were that Trouba was going to sign. His girlfriend is going to do a residency, and she wanted to be in New York for that, and that's what a good partnership is, and all of that. And he's going to reportedly sign a big deal with the Rangers and all of that, but that's a bad deal for the Winnipeg Jets. But they did get their number 20 pick back, which I guess is a good. I guess is good if you're gonna trade Jacob Trouba, but I don't know about that. But I know you got to go. Steve, really appreciate you coming on. Plug your social media. Plug what your all of your mock stuff, which has been fantastic to read. Plug that, and anything else you want to say. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. You could follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Draft Analyst. You could go to my draft blog, which is located at thedraftanalyst.com. I do have a podcast. I haven't done one in a while because I've been on everybody else's podcast, which is cool. But you could find the Draft Analyst podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. And I got my NHL Draft report is out. It's $5, about 170 pages, 250 scouting reports, 31 team previews, rankings, 2-round mock draft. You can find that also at thedraftanalyst.com. And then I also do contributions to Sporting News. I contribute to them. So you could follow them on Twitter at SN_NHL.
Awesome, Steve. Really appreciate coming on. I'll talk to you again real soon.
All right, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it.
You got it, Steve. And this has been episode number 53 of Chel Squared. The draft is tonight. Going to be some big stuff happening. And episode 54 coming out next week. I'll talk to you then.